There is a particular kind of dread that comes not from monsters or ghosts, but from watching someone just like you, charming, intelligent, desperate, make choices so cold and calculated that you cannot look away. That is the engine of Patricia Highsmith's 1955 masterpiece, The Talented Mr. Ripley. It is a novel about fraud, murder, obsession, and the terrifying ease with which one man dismantles another's life and steps inside it like a borrowed coat. And the most unsettling part? You root for him anyway. Tom Ripley is nobody, and that is precisely the problem. When we first meet him in New York City, he is a small-time grifter in his mid-20s, scrawny, anxious, perpetually broke, running low-level tax scams and sliding through life on the fringes of respectability. He has no family to speak of, no career, no real identity to anchor him to the world. What he does have is an almost supernatural gift for reading people, mimicking them, and disappearing into whatever social role the moment demands. He is not a villain in the cinematic sense, no grand monologue, no sinister laugh. He is worse than that. He is profoundly ordinary in his hungers. He wants comfort, beauty, status, and the simple luxury of not being afraid all the time. The tragedy and the horror is what he is willing to do to get those things. The novel opens with a stroke of irony that Highsmith deploys like a blade. Herbert Greenleaf, a wealthy American shipbuilder, approaches Tom under a fundamental misunderstanding. He believes Tom is a close friend of his son, Dickie Greenleaf, who has retreated to the sun-soaked village of Montebello on the Italian coast, seemingly intent on wasting his inheritance painting mediocre watercolors and living the life of a gentleman layabout. Herbert wants Tom to go to Italy, befriend Dickie, and convince him to come home. He will pay all expenses and give Tom a generous fee for his trouble. Tom barely knows Dickie, but he says yes instantly. Here is where Highsmith shows her hand as a writer of profound psychological insight. Tom does not hesitate because the money is good, though it is. He hesitates for only a heartbeat because something else ignites in him. The idea of Dickie Greenleaf's life. The warmth. The ease. The sailboat and the villa and the meals on terraces above the Mediterranean. Tom has spent his entire life with his face pressed to the glass, watching people like Dickie exist without effort. Now someone is handing him a plane ticket to stand inside that world, even temporarily. He takes it, and everything that follows is the consequence. Montebello is rendered by Highsmith with an almost cruel beauty. The light is golden, the sea is blue, the wine is cheap and plentiful. Into this idyll arrives Tom Ripley, pale, watchful, and electric with a yearning he himself cannot fully name. Dickie Greenleaf is everything Tom is not, handsome in an effortless sun-bronzed way, charming without trying, beloved by the village expatriate community, and, crucially, utterly unaware of how lucky he is. He has a girlfriend, the earnest and perceptive Marge Sherwood, who writes novels and sees through Tom almost from the beginning. Marge is one of the novel's great, underrated figures. Her intuition is correct at every turn, and she is systematically disbelieved and dismissed, which tells us something grim about how the world works. Tom ingratiates himself with Dickie through sheer force of adaptability. He learns jazz because Dickie loves it. He learns the rhythms of Dickie's days, his tastes, his mannerisms, the cadence of his speech. And here the novel enters genuinely unsettling territory, because Tom's feelings for Dickie are complicated in ways that exceed simple friendship or envy. There is adoration bordering on obsession. There is desire, not entirely or straightforwardly physical, but deeply intimate. A longing to fuse with another person, to replace them, to become them. Dickie, for his part, finds Tom amusing for a while, but he is also fundamentally shallow, and his interest wanes. He grows irritated by Tom's closeness, his obvious dependence. He tells Tom plainly that their time together is coming to an end. This is the moment everything breaks. In a small rowing boat on the bay of San Remo, Tom Ripley kills Dickie Greenleaf. It happens with the kind of sudden, brutal practicality that Highsmith renders unforgettably. Tom strikes him with an oar. It is frantic, messy, desperate, and then it is done. Dickie's body disappears beneath the surface of the winter sea. And Tom, sitting in the rocking boat, begins to think. Not about what he has done morally, not about guilt or grief or the enormity of having ended a human life. He thinks about logistics. He thinks about what comes next. And what comes next, Tom decides with terrifying clarity, is that he is going to become Dickie Greenleaf. This is the pivot on which the entire novel turns, and it is one of the great conceptual audacities in 20th century crime fiction. Tom does not run. He does not confess. He goes back to Dickie's apartment, puts on Dickie's clothes, practices Dickie's signature, and begins to live Dickie's life. Drawing on Dickie's bank accounts, writing letters in Dickie's voice to Dickie's father, slowly constructing an elaborate fiction in which Dickie is alive, somewhere, traveling, fine. What follows is a sustained exercise in psychological tension that Highsmith controls with the precision of a surgeon. Tom moves through Italy, Rome, Venice as Dickie, and then as himself again when the situations demand it, navigating the increasingly complicated web of lies with a coolness that is genuinely frightening. There are close calls. Freddie Miles, one of Dickie's actual friends, comes looking and gets too close to the truth. Tom kills him too, in a flat in Rome, and once again the murder is depicted not with operatic drama, but with horrible, mundane efficiency. Tom's violence is not passionate, it is practical. That is what makes it so deeply disturbing. The police begin to circle. An Italian inspector named Roverini is quietly, persistently interested in the disappearances. Tom must manage this threat, while also managing the suspicions of Marge, who knows in her bones that something is wrong, and Herbert Greenleaf, who is growing desperate for real news of his son. Highsmith structures all of this with an almost unbearable control of dramatic irony. The reader knows everything. The characters around Tom know almost nothing. And in the gap between those two states of knowledge, the tension builds to an almost intolerable pressure. To read The Talented Mr. Ripley only as a thriller is to miss its deeper, more subversive project. Highsmith is asking something genuinely philosophical. What is a self, and how much of it is performance? Tom Ripley is a villain, but he is also a mirror. His great talent is not forgery or murder, it is observation. He sees how identity works, how people construct themselves from clothes and accents and mannerisms and money, and he understands that these things are not fixed. They are habits. They are learned. And what is learned can be copied. The novel was written and published in 1955, an era in America defined by conformity, by the pressure to be a certain kind of man, settled, straight, productive, respectable. Tom Ripley is a savage critique of that world dressed up as a genre novel. He is not transgressive because he kills people. He is transgressive because he refuses to accept that his birth, his poverty, his lack of connections defines the limits of his life. He simply reaches out and takes the life he wants, with both hands. Highsmith herself was a deeply complicated figure, an American expatriate living in Europe, a woman whose sexuality placed her outside the approved social scripts of her era, a writer who was commercially successful but never quite granted the literary respect she deserved in her lifetime. Tom Ripley is, in some readings, her most honest self-portrait. The person who looks at the world's rules and finds them arbitrary and cruel and decides, quietly, to stop following them. And then comes the ending, which remains one of the most debated and morally provocative conclusions in the history of crime fiction. Tom Ripley gets away with it. Not in a cliffhanger sense, not with a last-minute escape. He simply, methodically, with considerable intelligence and luck, evades punishment entirely. The novel ends with him receiving a financial inheritance from Dickie's estate, money for a dead man whose death he caused. He is free. He is comfortable. He is, in a grotesque way, successful. Highsmith refuses to deliver the moral satisfaction that the genre traditionally promises. There is no justice, no reckoning, no final reveal that brings the killer to account. Tom Ripley walks out of the novel into the Italian sunshine, and the reader is left holding the weight of that injustice, with nowhere to put it. This is a deliberate, provocative choice. Highsmith is not endorsing Tom. She is observing him the way a scientist observes a specimen, with fascination, without flinching. And she is forcing the reader to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the world does not reliably punish people like Tom Ripley. That charm and intelligence and the ability to navigate class structures can, in fact, get you very far. That the gap between the guilty and the free is often just good luck and a convincing performance. The Talented Mr. Ripley launched a series of 5 novels following Tom through Europe over the following decades, through further murders, further frauds, further escapes. He became one of literature's great anti-heroes, a character whose longevity speaks to something Highsmith understood about human psychology. We are drawn to people who do what we cannot, who refuse the limits we accept, even when, especially when, those things are monstrous. The novel has been adapted multiple times. The most celebrated is Anthony Minghella's 1999 film, which captures the sun-drenched beauty and psychological suffocation of the source material. With Matt Damon's Tom, soft-featured, desperately eager, quietly terrifying, proving that the character translates to screen with his full unnerving power intact. More recently, the 2024 Netflix series Ripley, shot in stark black and white by Steven Zaillian, leaned into the novel's austerity and psychological darkness, finding Andrew Scott's portrayal earning considerable critical acclaim. Highsmith sold the original book for $3,000. It has never been out of print. The Talented Mr. Ripley endures because it asks a question we are not supposed to ask out loud. If you could take the life you deserved, not the life you were born into, but the one you were capable of, and the only obstacle was someone else's existence, what would you do? Most of us would not answer the way Tom does. But Highsmith makes sure that the question lingers, uncomfortable and unresolved, long after the last page. That is the real talent of Tom Ripley. Not forgery, not murder. The ability to make you wonder,